I'm realizing that so much of this is coming down to not communication, but just believability. If you have to tell me how much pride I should have and how much growth I have and how much you recognize me, but I don't just feel those things, then they don't really exist in the way that you think they do. Do you know what does work in a comms channel really well? Listen up, everybody.
Despite massive investments in communication and engagement tools and technologies, or maybe because of them, store teams have reported feeling more disconnected from their companies than ever. While juggling multiple communication systems and endless directives from various corporate departments, store leaders have to choose between staying on top of corporate messages and initiatives or focusing on their core mission of running great stores, supporting their teams, and serving customers. In our last episode, we discussed the growing disconnect between corporate and store teams. Today, we're diving deeper into one of the key contributors to that disconnect: problematic communication systems and cycles. We'll reveal how employee engagement surveys trigger reactive communication campaigns that miss the mark, and why the solution isn't another app or platform or communications at all. It's understanding and working through the channels that actually matter in retail. I'm Bekki Cait, joined by my co-host, veteran store leader Matt Copeland, and we're about to unpack why adding more communications is actually leading to less connection and what actually matters when bringing corporate initiatives to life in stores successfully. Matt, set the scene for us. You've walked into your store, you're opening up. What's on your list, and what are the things that you have to check to be ready to open your store? Because for me, when I walk into my office, I check my email, I'll check my calendar, and I'll check my project management tool to see what I've got for that day or week. What do you have to do?
That sounds so nice.
Jealous?
I'm jealous. So yeah, I think in every company, it's pretty much the same where you're walking in. And for me as a store leader, like the first thing I'm doing is just like looking at my store. Like, what state is it in? Are there any like 911s I should address this morning? I don't address them right away. I just want to take note of them. And then I'm looking at my schedule. Who's here today with me? Let's think about that. And maybe who like called out the day before. What do I have to adapt and change? And then also looking at my calendar. Do I have any conference calls that are going to pull me off the floor today, or any required things I need to partake in? And then the next step is usually the regular store opening stuff, such as opening registers, checking whether we have a buy online, pickup in store orders. And then the following thing is usually checking all of the comms channels. So looking at my email, and then checking whatever the company portal is for any corporate messaging or maybe 911. Sometimes there's, if you work somewhere with like cosmetics, there might be a recall. If you work somewhere with clothing, there might be like we've actually noticed this shirt is stitched wrong, so please pull all the black tees from women's off the floor, looking for messaging like that. And then also checking the district specific communication tool, like an app with, messaging, looking at what the priorities are for that, and then kind of just putting it all together and planning my day around, again, who's here, when do they need to go to break, when am I off the floor, what 911s did I find, and kind of putting all of that information I just said together to think about how to best prioritize and have a good day.
So there's no chance in hell that you're going to walk in knowing what your day is going to look like.
No. I mean, you know what the funny part is that one of the things I actually really enjoy about Black Friday and other big days in retail is actually, and this is maybe not a popular opinion, but I love them because they're very predictable. Corporate leaves you alone. There's no extra messaging on Black Friday because you have to just execute and do. There's no one sending you like, you know what you should do today? Where's a conference call at 11? That's not happening. So the day before Black Friday, Thanksgiving, after eating dinner with your family, it's not great to have to like maybe wake up at 4 a.m., although those days are slowly fading, thank God. But you do know what your day looks like. That's actually your only day that's highly predictable. You know your schedule. Most people won't call out because it's considered like a sin. You know what your staffing looks like. You know exactly what your day looks like. So I think that's the only day of the year that you get like a guaranteed, here's what your day will be.
Which is hilarious because it's maybe the most chaotic day. But the whole point is at least corporate's not going to bother you. Is that basic? At least that's the day that they respect everything that's going on in your store and they don't pull you away with their own things. That's very interesting. Make every day Black Friday. Got it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the analogy that I'll use is, have you ever gone to play like a game on your phone? Like you've downloaded Solitaire or something and you're like, I just want to play a game. But the game forces you to go through a tutorial, even though you already know how to play solitaire, and then you're just like clicking angrily through the tutorial. That's a lot of times what a lot of corporate messaging feels like. You're like, I know how to do this. And instead of doing the thing, running the business, you're making me click through the tutorial. So I'm not actually doing my job right now. I'm clicking a thing so you can tell me how to do my job, and that so that I know how to do my job.
Right.
And really, I just want to do the job. I just want to play solitaire.
Amazing. So, what happens? Tell me about the long term effects of this. Like maybe you can think about the most challenging place you've worked in terms of getting way too many corporate communications that, as you just described, don't feel relative to what you need to do that day or how you want to do it. What do you end up doing? What happens?
You get bogged down, obviously, but I think also you lose a lot of the joy you have for your job, because I think one place I work, and they weren't the worst with corporate communication, but I think this is a good example. I had always wanted to change the way our men's denim wall was set up because it never made sense to me. But I could almost never get to that project because there was always like something else that I needed to do for corporate that would prevent me from doing that project. And one day I just kind of was like, it. I'm doing the project. And I kind of pushed things to the back burner and did my project. And it was so, I mean, it led to better sales in men's denim. And that's obviously super important, especially to the corporate teams, that I didn't waste time doing something that didn't have a financial result. But also for me, it just brought me such joy and pride, and for my team, because they were like, wow, that's so much better. It's easier to put things back. It's easier to keep things sized. It looks better. You have more pride when you're helping someone in that section, because now you're like, look at what we can help you with. And I think those are the things you can't get to when you're like, and here's another random thing. We would like you to move the ankle socks above the knee socks because we've decided that is super important. And so, to get back to your original question, it starts to take away the parts that you do love about your job, those fun things that you get to do. And also, and very obvious, but needs to be stated, it takes away from the customer experience because you're never truly just with the customer. And even when you are, if you're coming into my store, I'm like, oh my God, welcome in. What are you looking for? And in the back of my mind, I'm like, God, I hope you just want to shop by yourself and don't really need me, because I've got 62 things to do. And if I'm really good at faking it, you'll never know that. But on maybe a day that I'm tired, it might be obvious that you're like, okay, this guy is saying hi, but he doesn't really want to say hi. And so it affects the customer experience too, because think about, even as consumers, go into a store, especially like a bigger box store, but even sometimes like a smaller clothing store in a mall, and someone greets you and then immediately turns back around and they're like retagging something, and you're like, oh, they're busy. Like, I am in the way. And customers shouldn't feel like they're in the way. They shouldn't even know. I've always used this example. Some people hate it, some people love it, but I really feel like retail needs to move to a place where stores really need to feel like Disney World. Customers should not know how we mark things down, when we mark things down, how we move things, when we move things. They shouldn't know any of that. It should be like a magical experience where they have no idea how the back end works. And instead, all too often, they know exactly how it works because they're like in the way of us doing those things.
So you're getting like a silly amount of directives from corporate, and it's impacting the customer experience. It sounds like there's a bit of subcontext there. What's happening in your brain the more and more you get messages from corporate that feel like they're telling you what to do, even though you feel like you know what to do and maybe have potentially better ideas of what needs to be done for store performance? What is that saying to you if they're just saying, here's this thing, like, just do it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think it's subconscious a lot of times. I think it's quite
Yeah.
top of mind, of where it depends on the role, but sometimes it's like, why did you even hire me? Like, why am I here? You could have hired an AI bot to do this, honestly. And obviously, I know we're going to get to this later, but the problem is, and this is where I feel like the true split happens internally for me, is you want a bot to get all these things done, but then when it comes to employee engagement, you need the exact opposite of a bot. So you're asking me to be two separate, very different entities at once. This like feeling sensitive, empathic person who's going to lead our team to the best engagement and happy employees. But also, please do these 72 tasks in this order, A to Z, and be robotic about it. Don't think, don't use your brain. And that really leads to being like, I don't really know what you want from me. And I feel like if you look at retail managers, you'll find a lot of them choose one path or the other because it's very difficult to be both.
I'm glad you brought up employee engagement because I think that's where I want to get to. All this stuff is happening. This is how your day to day is going. And then it's employee engagement survey time or employee experience survey time. We all know there are a lot of questions on there that are about cultural initiatives. This is where corporate, I think, genuinely wants to hear how you're feeling about your work and working with them. So we can get into the gritty details of how this can go right and how it can go wrong. Questions like, I'm recognized when I do something well, or I have opportunities for career growth here, I have a future here, or I feel pride for my organization. When those come up after what you've just described, what's going through your head?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I do think a lot of companies, and I didn't really think about this until just now as you said this. I think a lot of companies send employee engagement surveys and don't send a lot of communication for the 3 or 4 weeks before it. You don't have some of those things at the top of your mind. And they definitely don't send like big changes or bad things that are coming your way before the employee engagement survey. And I never really thought about that. Now I'm thinking about the time of year that a lot of companies send them. And I'm like, well, you don't send it the day after Christmas is over.
Right.
You're sending it in like February. We've made it through clearance season.
Yeah.
A lot of those questions really depend on your state of mind, whether you're having a bad day or a good day. I think for employees, it's probably even more different, like whether they like their manager or not. I think then that's just going to skew them to be like, well, I hate everything here. Everything sucks. And, I'm recognized when I do something well as one of those ones that is so tricky. I think for store managers, even more tricky because I think from my perspective, I think most of the time I do something well, I am recognized for it. But my two critiques, and why I probably never answer that question very favorably, honestly, is it's either that I'm recognized for doing something well, but if I do something the same equal weight poorly, it feels like that gets way more attention, focus, or time. But then also, it feels because of all of these corporate initiatives, all these things we have to get done, all of the things that we want to do, the recognition is fast and furious, and then we move on. And I remember I went to work somewhere. It was one of the most challenging roles I've ever taken in my career. I still think about it when I have a tough day because I go, if I can do that, I can do anything. And I remember the first 9 months were really rough. And then I like hustled through it, came around the other side of it, and got a corporate visit probably 6 months after I was like doing phenomenally well. And they were like, we want to know how you turned it around because they knew I was struggling. And they asked me and they were like, because this is amazing. We want to replicate what you've done. And while that was great, that was the compliment. Up
Right.
until that moment, no one had ever been like, wow, this is incredible. And so
Right.
it's like your compliment to me was a question on how you replicate it rather than recognizing that I did it. And that it felt great, but also was like, it was a little bittersweet. Again, I think the I am recognized question is tricky because I think it feels like it's never equal to what people do wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have opportunities for career growth and development. I think, again, is what does that mean? Do you mean we're all going to interpret that question differently? So we're all going to answer it differently. If I'm in a bad mood, am I interpreting that as the next role or just a skill I want to learn? And I'm like, well, I learned nothing here and I can't grow. Or am I in a great state of mind? And I'm like, yeah, sometimes I learn things. Sure, benefit of the doubt. Yeah, great. Career growth is great. So I think it all comes down to frame of mind. And then questions like I feel proud of the organization. I think some companies really lean heavy into you should be proud to work here because we make the best denim in the industry. I work somewhere that's something they were very proud of. They're like one of the number one denim sellers and the quality and the product is great. And I think they wanted you to derive your pride of I work at X because of that. And then there are companies that are more like value driven. But again, all of us are going to answer differently because maybe you make the best product, but I know for sure we're using like underpaid labor in some other country to produce those denim. So I don't actually feel too proud. So I don't even know what they're asking. And I don't think anyone does. And I don't even know that they know what they're asking.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think this Employee engagement survey questions make it really difficult to understand the actual story or why employees are answering the way they are. I never see a follow up there to say, if you don't feel like you can reach your career goals here, why not? And that even if that had to be a multiple choice too, is it you don't think you can make enough money here? Is it you don't think we offer the kind of role that, yeah, that you aspire to have in later years? Or is it you're having a bad time and you want to work somewhere you actually like being? At least then we get something to go on. And I know some retailers who have open comment fields where those can get filled in, but sometimes those retailers have tens of thousands of people answering those things. And usually those are put through some sort of theme generating software, and you miss some potential nuance. I also don't think there's a lot of cross correlation going on. So, for example, if I'm someone who is struggling and answered unfavorably to the idea of pride, are those people also maybe answering unfavorably to something about like sustainability? There's no kind of, I don't really see the story being told from these numbers. What I do see are quick reactions
Yes.
for what to do next.
And now we must do next. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So really when employee experience surveys should be a time to get curious about why, they tend to be actually be a time to pump out reactions instead. And so what I would love to do with you is break them down because I think those are three really common ones that retailers struggle with. I like that they're all cultural focused. And so this kind of goes beyond I know it's an issue that you get so many communications from merchandising and marketing and things like that for actual things to happen in stores. But let's talk about like the culture things and engagement initiatives, if you're cool with that.
Of course.
So, for example, we'll start with the recognition one. Something like I'm recognized when I do something well, or maybe this is like I feel valued. Anything about feeling valued in a company, I feel like that falls under this bucket. What I'm hearing from you, based on what you said at the top of this episode, was it's been wild. It's been wildly busy for a long time. I don't really think corporate recognizes that or appreciates what I've been able to pull off here. What I think corporate hears from that engagement survey is teams aren't aware enough, aren't hearing enough about our formal annual recognition programs, or we need a fun, snappy way to gamify recognition, right? Like retail is fast paced. What's the next? Maybe an app that we can give them that they can show recognition in the moment and offer them incentives. They get this many points and they exchange them for whatever the thing is. So, and then the funny thing about that is that new app comes with likely millions of dollars in investment, months creating change management plans to roll this app out, news cascaded, lots of job aids and communications and videos created. Everyone gets changed. The new tech gets launched. Adoption is limited. Results and feedback aren't great. Employee engagement survey comes back again, and you probably haven't answered much more favorably to the I feel recognized or valued thing. That was a lot. All that to say, if you could tell corporate something, if maybe you're thinking of back on your experience of somewhere where you know you've answered unfavorably to this idea of I feel recognized or valued, what are you trying to say to corporate through that response? Because I don't think I'd like an app.
No, I think what gets focused on is what happens in retail. And so if you want recognition to be something that is happening more frequently, where employees are getting recognized, it can't be like a passive board or something like that. I'll use an example and then I'm going to go backwards, but I had an amazing DM at Starbucks named Jake. And one of the things he said to all of us as store managers, and it really stuck with me. It's so obvious. And when he said it, it was almost one of those things where I'm like, that is so obvious. It makes me angry that that's never really fully occurred to me, which was, he said, when you recognize someone for doing a good job, you should actually do the same thing to them that you would do if you were about to have a coaching conversation. So if you're going to have a coaching conversation with them and your way of doing that is to bring them to the back and sit them at the desk, then that is exactly how you should recognize them. I need to talk to you. Come on back. And they sit down and you spend a full 5 minutes praising them up and down, fully focused on them and only them, and are like, you're really great. And here are the ways you're really great. And I really appreciate it. And then they're going to look at you like, and that's what I had to come back here for? That's all you want? That's all I wanted. Nothing else. I don't want to ask you about your schedule. I don't need to ask you if you can work extra Saturday. Like that dedicated time. Because if you were going to coach someone or write them up, that's how it would be. You wouldn't ask them anything else. It wouldn't be about anything else.
Mhm.
And you should give equal time and attention. And that also makes it so that coming to the back isn't always this thing. It could be an exciting thing. Oh my God, I get to come to the back. That must mean I did something great. And so like giving people the time and attention. And I think one of the ways that corporate teams, DMs, store managers can all get that to be a focus is if we're asking about it and talking about it. Like if a DM asked every store leader, so how many minutes this week have you spent on recognition? I mean, if it's a board or an app, I could probably recognize everyone on my team in less than 30 minutes. But if I have to like personally talk to them all, we might be in the hours depending on how many employees we have. But no one's asking me that. But they're asking about merchandising, about sales, about other metrics. So it's again, what gets asked about is what gets focused on.
In your years of being a store manager, were you ever taught about the importance of recognition?
So it's funny that you asked that because yes and no. So like everyone talks about recognition, but a lot of people other than Jake and maybe a few other people, like no one really like dives into what does that look like or what should it look like? What does it mean? And actually what's funny is I always thought I was good at recognition because I am very like I joke around with my team a lot and I praise them often casually and I talk about them in positive ways. And I actually asked for some, before I got into my latest retail role, asked some former employees, and that was like their one biggest critique was that they didn't feel like they knew that I liked their work because of other things that I said and did on the side, but I had never said it directly enough to them in a way that mattered. And I think part of that, is obviously my own learning and I need to think about how I do a better job going forward. And part of that is, I'm focusing on all the things that I have to do and check a box. And that's just not something that I had to check a box for. So it's very easy to be like, well, I told that person as I was passing them the other day, you're amazing. Thanks so much. As I walked by. Yeah, so they know, like, why sit them down?
So I'm wondering if you could do it differently, because I kind of want to get at two things here. I want to get at what would it take for your team to answer favorably to this question? And then what would it take for you to be able to do the things that your team needs to answer favorably to that question, but then also for you to answer favorably to that question?
Oh, simple, Becky. Simple.
Just solve it, Matt. God.
I think I'll work, down and then up to me.
Yeah.
I think in order for my teams to say that, and the funny thing is I've had teams answer that question pretty favorably, but I think I personally have done a really great job at rewarding teams as a collective and not a great job at rewarding individuals because I'm very big on, I'm going to put my whole self into a leadership role. So I'm going to bake cakes for my team and I'm going to like do funny things or use myself as like a jester to bring levity and whatever. And I'll reward my team in ways that are goofy. So I'm good at rewarding the whole, not necessarily the individual. But I think in order for me to do that, I would need some time that I carve out to really, and I think I would actually have to put it, for me anyway, this isn't going to work for everyone. I think for me, I would have to like put it as a task. That doesn't mean I want corporate to tell me it's a task. I don't want to check a box. Did you recognize someone today? Just need to put that out.
Loud and clear.
I just need to separate and create time because there are store managers who are great at that. So they don't need to check the box. So I wouldn't want to push that on everyone when it's not something everyone needs to work on. So I think I would need to sit down with people individually and have that like one-to-one and make sure that they like really understand it. And I think in order to do that, I would need the time. Some of that would be corporate though, not having as many directives so that it was easier to find that time.
Right.
And then for me to ask that question, I think it's the same thing. I mean, I think if you get a visit, even from your boss, even one that you get along with, if it's an hour, let's say it's an hour, I mean, even if you're doing amazing, 50 minutes of that easy is where do we go next? That's being generous. It's probably 55. What I would need is why don't we spend 30 minutes, not praising me up and down, telling me I'm amazing, but 30 minutes recognizing and then talking about how we use my strengths. And I actually did have a leader do this really well. Her name was Jenna at Old Navy. And she was like, here are your strengths. Let's use them to grow your career and your capabilities. And like that to me is even better recognition because that's not just you're great. That's you're great. And now we're going to use that. And the role she put me in, by the way, which was the highest compliment, in my opinion, that I could have received, was training new store managers. So I think for me to answer that question, to get back to your question, would be being recognized and then having one of my strengths be actually utilized for the greater good of my store, my district, the company, whatever it may be. I also just
And
answered my question for what I could do for my teams while I said that out loud.
we're growing together. So what I'm hearing is what you need from corporate is to know that this is a priority for them too by giving you the space to do it. Not
Yes.
by giving you the mandate to do it, but by telling you that this is a priority because we know it's important. And so please make time. I think what you said was interesting about your Old Navy leader, Jenna. It sounds like she recognized you in a way that mattered to you. Because sometimes giving people more responsibility because of doing something really well is a very negative thing. That's a problem in some companies. It's like you get surprise, more work.
So it's interesting. There was something, I also had a leader at the same company who shall remain nameless, who gave me something extra to do that I didn't want to do. It was actually something I was bad at. And her logic was if I give you more responsibility in this area, it will help you improve.
Yeesh.
And I understood the premise of that, but it felt a little bit like punishment. But also, I'm a big believer in the principle of Clifton strengths and using people's strengths to get the best performance out of them. So it just felt like another hill to climb. Whereas like training new store managers, I was like so excited about the company and what we were doing and how to get the results I was getting that was just like, oh my God, I get to like share and this is exciting. So I think you're right. Like it was her also knowing what was going to make me feel like seen and recognized.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but general feelings on formal recognition programs.
I think they're important. I think they should exist. But I think that they should be like 5 to 10% of overall recognition. I think they should be there because I think sometimes it is cool to see your name on a wall or publicly be recognized and have other people know that someone recognized you for what you've done. But if it's the only one or if it's the main one, it can feel quite trite and, oh, you don't actually care. You're just, this was easy to like throw a board with some kudos cards that we all fill out. And then lastly, I just want to say that I think they are important for peer to peer recognition. I think peers like recognizing each other and it's a way for them to do it. I had several teams at different companies, very different values and structures and cultures where those boards became really fun for teams to write each other little notes and get excited. And they would come in the day and they'd be like, oh my God, I have 5 cards. So I think peer to peer recognition, it works. But I noticed at all of those places, if I wrote a card for people, it didn't mean very much, honestly. Like they wanted something else, they wanted something more.
Interesting. Okay. So, in summary, if we're talking about responses to the employee experience survey of I'm recognized when I do something well or I feel valued for the work I do, I think what we want corporate to take away is look, you're not necessarily going to get the most bang for your buck by another communications campaign about your former recognition program or by a massive financial investment in a recognition app. Instead, it seems like making sure that your managers know that it's a priority and have the space and training if needed to do it, both to your point on a team level, but then also on a personal level, and making sure it has the same weight, like you said, as the negative stuff, which there seems to be no shortage of. Amazing. Okay, I'd love to do the same thing with the next two if we have time. Let's talk about career opportunities, or I have a future here. I believe I can develop here. What I think corporate hears, what I tend to hear when we talk to corporate leaders about things they want to run as communication campaigns as a result of this survey is teams aren't aware of how many different kinds of jobs exist here. There's so much opportunity here. We need to make sure they know about all the different jobs, or we need to make career paths more clear or post them in the break room. What are you actually frustrated with? What are you actually trying to tell them?
So I think actually for me and my teams, this is actually the same answer, which is it's something corporate needs to do, and it's not a comms campaign. which is if I look around and I've never seen a peer promoted to a district manager or a corporate role or some other like specialized role they're interested in, I'm answering no to that question regardless of what I want or regardless of what learning opportunities I have, because I've never seen it. Now, if I work somewhere where I'm constantly seeing people get promoted, moved around, get higher volume stores, they're now actually on the, visual team for corporate, whatever it may be, I'm answering yes to that question, even if I feel like personally I haven't got a lot of growth, because I can see with my own eyes that growth is a priority. So if everyone you're hiring as external and not internal, most people are answering no. It doesn't matter how many fancy training programs you have or how many jobs are open if no one in the organization is getting those jobs. So I think that one is quite simple, and I don't need to drone on forever. It's either you're promoting internally or moving internally or you're not. And that's the solve for that question.
How about a communications campaign that talked about success stories? So let's say you don't know them firsthand. They're not a first person connection.
No, sorry. Next. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you have to have a success stories comms thing, that means there aren't enough people being promoted. You're using the 3 people you promoted out of 1,000 to say, look at how much we care. Look at the growth. If I'm in Massachusetts and you're showing me a story even from New York, our borders touch, that's too far away. Why am I looking at a growth story from New York? Where's the one in my area? So I think that even then I need to know them, because again, there are companies where I've seen it. I'll give an example. Starbucks, I've seen it happen. I've seen store managers become district managers. I've seen district managers become area managers. I've seen baristas go to corporate and become something in the art, whatever. I don't need you to give me a story. They still do it because that's just something a lot of companies do, where they send out a newsletter and they're like, so-and-so is now the whatever. And that's cool because it reinforces what you already know. Again, that's sort of like the formal recognition. The comms program to show success reinforces what employees already know. It should not be the thing that's communicating to them.
So you need to know people firsthand. You need to see it in your store, in your district.
I need to
Something.
have met them. But so does my team. I mean, if I tell my team, I'm going to invest in you and I want you to be the next store manager, but they've never seen an assistant manager get promoted to store manager in our district, they're probably not going to put in the full effort. They're going to think that I am stringing them along to keep them, to make them work harder, to be better, to basically know as much as I know to make myself have an easier job, but not actually because they're going to get that role.
Gotcha. So it's just a believability thing. If I haven't seen it happen around me, I just don't believe you.
Correct. Yeah.
Or I'm going to answer negatively to that question. Okay. So am I hearing then, in terms of what corporate might be able to do to improve this engagement score, this particular one, is it really just promote more from within?
Yes. Because we could have a whole episode about companies looking at internal applicants and going, they don't have the experience, or like, we want someone who can, and I hate this phrase, I think it should be banned, hit the ground running. So you want someone who can be battered and bruised to move forward. That sounds beautiful. Love that. Great for culture. And you're going to hire someone external that now maybe that person under them has to train. There's just a lot wrong with, again, the hiring system. Episode forthcoming.
Right.
But yes, that is what they have to do to get a better answer, is to promote internally.
Okay. Real quick, how about if we're not talking specifically about promotions, but more growth development? At one point a while back, you had told me a story about understanding what people on your team wanted to do and finding the connection between things that they could do in retail that would apply to that thing.
I believe the story I told you about is someone who wanted to be a set designer and then using them in the visual department to learn more about not only visuals and helping them, but also when you're in visuals, you're going to get critiques from not only me, but the district visual, maybe the head visual, maybe our district manager has thoughts about how it's impacting sales. And when you're a set designer, you're going to get lots of critiques from production assistants and actors. And I wanted them to build that skill. I think that's important still. And I think that it's potentially that person could answer yes to that question. But I think that people, myself included, still have to see a lot of it. So it's not, we're not putting that person on a board. Look at what we're letting her do to learn how to grow skills for the career she really wants. It's really just people have to look around and go, oh, wow, Matt, or I see other store managers. Maybe, for me, I'm training new store managers and I'm answering yes to that question, but it still is a believable, I see people doing things that they want to be doing. Want to be doing.
Want
Want.
to be doing. Got it.
One more
Okay.
time. Want.
Got it. Okay, let's jump to maybe the more ambiguous one of the three, this idea of company pride. Maybe we can even tie in the idea of a net promoter score, or I would recommend working here to a friend. If I were to summarize what I think corporate response, and again, it's going to be communications focused because the theme of today's episode is problematic communication system. And I think the whole system is just, we're not just communicating the wrong things, we're communicating in the wrong ways, and these things aren't actually communications issues. But a lot of what I think corporate hears to an unfavorable score in this idea of pride is our teams don't know our achievements. They don't know all the really wonderful things we're doing, the amount of money we've invested in communities, the amount of money we've invested in sustainable practices for the environment, the things we are doing on a D&I front. So we need to tell them more. We need more communications about those things. What are you actually saying?
I mean, again, I think it's really about how we interpret that question, because I think the question is so ambiguous. Do I have pride in the product we're making? Do I have pride in the values we have as a company? Do I have pride in our culture that feels warm and welcoming and friendly? So I think it depends on what frame of mind people are coming at. And I think depending on the employee, like if I love the product, like if I think the product is the best product that exists on the market in that category, I might be like, yeah, I have a lot of pride because no one is doing it as good as we are. It could be a toxic culture, but I'm like, I have pride that I work here because maybe there's a certain cachet out in the public about me working here. People are like, oh my God, you work for that company? They're so cool. And so maybe I'm answering yes that way, or maybe I'm answering yes because I know about all the values that we say that we have, or I'm answering no because I don't see the values. I do think, though, that as you're asking me this question, I'm realizing that so much of this is coming down to not communication, but just believability. If I'm not seeing it in my day-to-day, I'm just answering no to these things. Or I'm answering yes if I see them in my day-to-day. Because if you have to have a big multi-million-dollar campaign to convince me you've done great things, terrible analogy, but it feels like the friend or the partner who has to tell you how good of a person they are. If I'm not experiencing it, you're not a good person. And so if you have to tell me how much pride I should have and how much growth I have and how much you recognize me, but I don't just feel those things, then they don't really exist in the way that you think they do in the day-to-day. And I think that's what it all comes down to.
I think you kind of just hit the nail on the head because corporate teams are listening through the best legacy systems that they have, but those systems are crap. It is just the status quo as it is creating more questions than it is answering them. But they keep defaulting their familiar solutions. It's the exact same things their competitors are doing. So it feels very safe. It feels very logical and it feels very data backed. It feels like we're collecting data and responding appropriately. But those exact same things, I think the system itself is never analyzed. Is this actually keeping us stuck? Is this what's keeping our scores either stagnant or declining year after year? And especially like most companies will also have a survey question, something to the effect of, I believe that change will happen as a result of this survey. It doesn't usually get a favorable score. So I think, yeah, like I said, I think you just nailed it. I think the bottom line is corporate thinks almost everything is a communications issue and tries to solve everything with communication solutions. Even though what I think you're saying is we need our day-to-day to reflect this. I need to experience this every day. It doesn't matter what you put in my break room or in my app or on my intranet.
This is anecdotal, but I'm just thinking about it. And I know you're probably going to ask me a question, but I'll answer it before you ask. I'm just thinking about, let's say pride in our product is something you want to get across. Like that's the question you're really asking. Do you have pride in what we sell? Which I think if that's the question they're asking, it should actually say it that way. Let's say it's denim. How you bring that to life in the day to day means that one, everyone knows all of the stitches that are possible for denim, and there are many. They know how the denim is made, where it's made. You talk about it in the store, but then also you really live by the product. That means if someone returns it because it ripped in the crotch, regardless of the return policy, well, we're taking it back because
Yeah.
we have pride in our product. And that is just one small example in the top of my head. That is how you bring it to life day to day. That's like a real life, tangible thing. And then I'm answering yes on that question because I'm like, you know what? I am proud of it because when our product fails, we still stand behind it and do the right thing. We don't go, well, actually, ma'am, it's been 32 days and our policy says that we can't do a return for 30 days, but maybe we could give you another % off of your next pair. That's not pride.
I love prideless employee voice.
One of the things I'm known for, I always do a weird impression for different things. It's how I train people on service, especially like the flat, like customer service voice. I'm like, don't sound like this. But anyway, I digress.
No, I think it's great. This is somehow both a much harder and a much simpler question. I think it can feel very daunting and ambiguous to corporate to think, how do we start that? How do we make every associate feel this day to day, right? If we can break it down, and this is what we've done, if we actually say, how do we stop saying, how do we get stores to engage with our systems? How do we start getting them to use our recognition app, to read our posters, watch our videos? And how do we engage with stores in their systems? What we talk about is there are essentially three for simplification. There's your manager, which studies have shown account for a 70% variation in engaged teams. And that's outside of retail. I would think it's maybe even higher in retail because they have fewer channels. The other one is operations themselves. And I think that's just what you alluded to with your return policy, right? The return policy should reflect these things. And then there is what we call info hubs or the communications. And you said this earlier, and it's exactly true. You don't create engagement or sentiment through communications. They can enhance and sustain, but if those things aren't already being felt from your store manager or because of your day-to-day operations, you're putting like 99% of your investment and time into this channel of communications, which I would argue is 10% of the puzzle. Or managers and operations account for more 90. So if we're saying how might these things come to life through managers and then through operations, and then they might be more believable via communication. Let's talk about what that might look like.
If corporations just took a lot of that money they're investing in comms and information hubs and put it into developing leaders, so much of this gets solved. Because I'm telling you, as someone who, and this is going to sound, I hope the people listening aren't like, oh boy, this guy. But I read a lot, if it's possible. I read all the leadership books. If it's out there, I've probably read it. You don't need to recommend it. Some of it has obviously been absorbed. Clearly the recognition part, not so much. And I'm someone who's actively trying to be like a really great leader. And I'm not saying there are leaders out there who are like trying to be terrible. But I'm trying, and there's still so much I have to learn. There's still so much development I could use. That's not just me reading a book, because that's a very passive way to improve. And so it's if I'm putting all of this extra time of my own trying to improve, and I'm still not great at recognition, then my Lord, the people who aren't even trying or don't know where to start probably aren't doing great at all. And it's like if companies just were investing in actual leadership training and classes, all of this kind of, I don't want to say solves itself, but if managers are 70%, and I agree with you that it probably is more in retail, that is the gap that we're missing.
Yeah.
And some of it I think is a reminder. I'm going to use Old Navy as an example again. They used to pay for people to go take a class. I think everyone should take it. It's called situational leadership. It's so good. But you actually had the option to take it every time it came around. And there were people who took it every year because they were like, every year it's a good refresher. It reminds me, I learned something new about myself or how I lead, whatever. So it's not even one class is good enough. You need it over. And again, if recognition isn't in our day-to-day right now, the way to get it there is to make it a priority. And to make it a priority, it means we're going to have to start talking about it incessantly. and
Mhm.
never drop it. Means not just talking about it the week after the survey comes out, but maybe it's on the weekly conference call with your DM. It's like a section. Who have we recognized? And let's recognize them here on this call as well to
Yeah.
reinforce the idea of how important it is. Because again, what gets talked about is what gets done. If you talk to me about labor every week, guess what? I'm never going over labor because we're talking about it and it's annoying and I don't want to talk about it. I don't know if I've used this example with you, but I've used it to employees who are new managers. Like when I promote someone and now they're a leader, they're no longer a peer. And they're like, I told Johnny to do that. And he did it, but then the next week he didn't. And the example I always use is sometimes leadership is like being a mom nagging your kid to clean their room. No parent has ever asked their kid to clean their room once and it just got done, unless you're doing something you should not be doing to your children. And it's the same with
Yeah.
leadership. The only way people respond immediately and do it right away is probably if they're scared of you. And that shouldn't be what you want. So the way to get around that is you have to be a little bit repetitive. And even for
Mhm.
me, again, to go back to myself, if I had a leader who was like, have we sat down with employees and recognized them again? If they did that enough, it would just be in my habit. So that's your answer.
I love it. Yeah, which means, long story short, it's not an app, it's not gamification, and it's not your formal annual recognition programs,
It's
right?
leadership.
Boom, mic drop. If we're talking about career development, it's not a learning platform, it's not a poster showing the career paths, it's not success stories from someone who might live several states, provinces away. What is it? What do we need from our managers?
I'm going to again use a short story. I'll try to actually keep it short. But I, at Old Navy, promoted someone who I gave them a chance. It actually blew up in my face. It wasn't right for them. They knew it wasn't right for them. The whole team knew it wasn't right for them. And so I think a lot of companies are scared to do that because they're like, but then people are going to think you don't know how to promote or whatever. I go, it's no. The reaction my team had was, oh my God, Matt is willing. If you really want it, he's willing to put you out there, throw all of his effort into developing you. And if it fails, that's okay. We just let you step back down. No harm, no foul. So I think it's just showing people that it's possible.
Yeah. How about operations? Is there something that operationally happens or doesn't happen that makes it feel less like career development or growth is real? I mean, earlier we talked about even a practice of promoting within. I mean, I would say that's related to operations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, but also just making sure that, and I've worked for companies that do this where let's say they open a job requisition. When they go to do the final round or the second round of interviews, usually there are some companies that are like, oh, okay, we want two external, two internal. That's like an operational way of being like, even if people don't get it internally, well, now you know someone gets to the second round. So things like that.
Yeah. Okay. How about company pride? So if we're saying, look, it's not a communications campaign about how super wonderful you are, what is your manager doing to invoke company pride?
Oof. That might be the
Yeah.
hardest one. But I think a lot of it is just so if it's about the product quality, that means that I'm going to be talking about that for a portion of the day that we're having a conversation. To go back to what gets focused on is what happens. I think it's the same with talking. If I talk
Mhm.
to my employees, and I talk a lot, everyone who listens to this will know that. But if I talk to the same employee for 3 hours in a day, and if we're working 8 hours together, it's probably more like 7.5. And product quality is something that we want to be proudful in. And nowhere in that 7.5 hours do I talk about that. Then it's probably not going to feel like that's important or that I'm proud of it or that they should be proud of it. Same thing with the company initiatives or the values, whatever your point of pride should be. If it's just not being talked about in the day to day, and I really just need to throw this side story, comms, initiatives, and things in the hub can backfire and feel disingenuous. There was a new CEO at a company that I worked for who put out a video because that company had a lot of trouble with employee engagement, despite the fact that they felt they had great benefits and great programs and they were welcoming and inclusive and diverse and all that stuff. And they released this video where the CEO was talking to employees and being a real person And one of the people he talked to was a girl who had just recently come out as a lesbian to her family and wasn't accepted, but she was accepted at the company. And as someone who's gay and at the time had a lot of employees who were part of the queer community, we all watched that in horror because it was like, this feels so forced. Like, we actually already felt included in the company, but now this feels weird. This wasn't what we needed. And so I think a lot of times it can backfire because it's hard to do something like that genuinely. It really is. Because especially in this day and age, employees are increasingly skeptical. They're very skeptical of sustainability and purpose and values. And those videos actually sometimes have the opposite effect because, again, they just need to feel it and see it. So when it comes to pride, I'm just going to use that example. We already felt included. Everyone had pronoun pins. The company made it very clear that, treating someone in a way or not respecting their pronouns was not tolerated. That policy makes us feel included.
The operational policy, yeah.
The operational policy makes us feel included. You don't need to say it. You don't need to make a big deal about it. I think the more you make a big deal about it, the more it's like, what are we overcompensating for? I feel that way about companies that talk about how diverse or inclusive they are. If you're diverse, I'll see it. I'll walk into a store and go, oh, look, all the employees aren't white men. I don't need to see it on a poster. I don't need to read it in a job ad. Anyway, I'm going to step off my soapbox.
If the communication, if the video of the poster is the main point of that, is not that backhanded pat on the back for the company,
Yes.
rather than an actual, here's a policy, here's a real thing you can do, here's something you can get involved with, it feels ick.
And I just want to say one more thing about this topic, and I think it goes to everything. Do you know what does work in a comms channel really well? Really well. Listen up, everybody. Being really honest and actually admitting where the company has fallen short in a way that is just sincere and doesn't make excuses. The few times, and it hasn't happened a lot, but the very few times I've seen a company do that, I have had employees read things in basically shock. Holy crap, they said this? Wait, they're admitting they know. One of the examples was a CEO wrote a letter to the entire company basically about diversity and basically was like, as a white woman, I'll never know what it's like. As a company, we could do better. It was so real and honest and vulnerable and raw. And yeah, I'm sure it served a purpose. I'm sure 72,000 people edited it, but it was still admitting where we could do better. That is the kind of communications employees want to read in their back room, on their break room. That's the kind of communication that goes, oh, you really do value honesty because you're giving it to me. You really do value improvement, and you really do care about whatever we're admitting to because you're saying it. You're not, again, patting yourself on the back. And I think every company would move not only their scores, but just employee sentiment in general so far. Having that real communication really goes a long way. So if you want to invest in a comms strategy, that's the strategy you need to invest in, and not be scared to just say the real thing.
Okay. So we started this off by talking about how the proliferation of communication channels and messages in retail often lead to less effective communication. And I think you just perfectly encapsulated that in what you just described. More communications, more positive communications usually results in less believability, actually less connection. Despite the best intentions, more is not the answer. Communications is not necessarily the answer. So the solution isn't another app, platform. It's understanding the channels that actually matter in retail, that will actually move the needle on these things. So stop assuming that low engagement scores are always about awareness. It's not about awareness, it's about experience. Success equals a better day-to-day, not more tools. So think integration. How do I integrate this into my store manager training? How I explain my store manager priorities into our operations, our policy and practices. Integration, not addition. Engagement is not a stream that lives on top of operations. They are not separate. They're very much integrated. In retail especially, I would argue. So meet teams where they are. Managers, day-to-day operations, and then support those things with communications if you actually want to address root causes, not symptoms.
I think a great example, very small, but it's important, was at Old Navy. Like a lot of clothing retailers, we were supposed to check employee bags upon leaving, do a bag check. It's very common in retail.
Yuck.
And yeah, Old Navy got rid of it while I was there. And they said it was because trust was one of our values and it was something they were doing for decades. So it's better late than never, but they stopped doing it because trust was a value and it didn't signal trust that we were checking people's bags. And that is a great example to me of something, if you're looking for trust scores to go up, there's a policy you can actually get rid of. And I think to your point of what you just said, if companies took their engagement survey and then actually just split screen on their computers and did all of their policies and procedures, I think a lot of times they could probably find things that are there that are causing those answers or things that are missing that would help improve them.
Great idea. Sounds like a super task for ChatGPT. At some point, this podcast is going to come back to how AI is going to impact retail. That's one effective use of AI I think actually would make a difference in retail. Okay, appreciate it, Matt, as always. Any final thoughts?
No.
Nailed it.
You're listening to Dear Corporate, Love Stores.